Hi guys, this video presents an overview of Balibar's arguments for sections 1, 2, and 3 of the Nation Form, History and Ideology. In his introduction, he starts out by saying that all national histories follow an identical pattern, and they involve the idea of a continuity of a subject and the self-manifestation of the national personality. Now, this manifestation of the national personality is the idea that some invariable substance is passed on, the same sense of nationness is passed down generation to generation. This is the idea that the same person is walking through time, this kind of personhood of the nation. Balibar calls this a twofold illusion. The illusion is one of project and of destiny. The idea that this is a story of the nation growing up and becoming its final form or its destined form. Now, Balibar argues that this imagination of nations is an effective ideological form, but one that has to be constructed daily. This is a retrospective construction, just like the retrospective illusion, that uses the present to continually reinterpret and construct the past. Next, Balibar transitions to asking the question of when and why did the nation form emerge from the variety of pre-existing state forms, and this is section 2. Balibar argues that prehistory is not simply a stage of the linear destiny of the nation. He argues that history is a multiplicity of distinct events that do not necessarily imply a set next event or a subsequent event. He even argues that such frameworks do not belong to a single nation because they occurred within non-national frameworks. On page 88, he says, quote, "And they do not even belong by nature to the history of the nation state, but to other rival forms. It is not a line of necessary evolution, but a series of conjunctural relations which has inscribed them after the event into the prehistory of the nation form." Now, national units form from the structure of the world economy and as an instrument of competition. Balibar uses the writing of Immanuel Wallerstein to build this argument. He argues that modern nations are a product of colonization, and that other nation forms, aside from the nation state, have emerged throughout the history of capitalism. The question then becomes, why was the nation form preferred to any other of the pre-existing state forms that also emerged? And the answer to this is that class struggle, in addition to economic interest, explain this transformation of social formations into national formations. And this is a critical transition to the discussion of his next section. In section 3, the major question being asked is which social formations cannot be effectively nationalized and renationalized? Now, Balibar doesn't fully answer this question, and it's much more of a discussion. But he begins this discussion by asking the subsidiary question of what is the nation useful for? He argues that the nation form makes it possible to control class struggle. He says on page 90 that the privileged status of the nation form derives from the fact that the form made it possible for struggles between heterogeneous classes to be controlled, and for not only a capitalist class, but the bourgeoisies proper to emerge from these. State bourgeoisies both capable of political, economic, and cultural hegemony and produced by that hegemony. Balibar argues that it was the nation form that allowed the establishment of the bourgeoisie, which produces and is produced by hegemony. Secondly, the nation form is, in Balibar's eyes, not a necessary unilinear form, but instead one of the many forms that spawned from the global system. In fact, Balibar argues that the belief of the nation as a necessary event or necessary or ultimate political form leads to this uncritical acceptance of the nation as the ultimate political form. This is, in fact, what remedies social conflict, this idea that the nation is the way social organization was meant to be, and allows lines to be drawn across national or territorial lines rather than between or among class lines. So instead of all of the lower class being united in some kind of imagined community across the globe, you have instead nations divided amongst the globe with different sectors within them of lower class, middle class, and upper class, etc. Now, he continues along his answer to which social forms cannot be effectively nationalized, and he looks at where the nation form is weakest. He first examines new nations, which would be this idea of periphery states within Wallerstein's formulation. And he says perhaps the nation form is weakest here because they are born inherently into an internationalized system. But then he also looks at old nations, which would be the core with a semi-periphery. And he says perhaps the nation form is weakest here because the national form is decomposing, though at an unknown rate. Ultimately, Balibar concludes that contemporary nationalism tells us nothing of the real age of the nation form in relation to world time. He next examines whether or not the project of nationalism, or the project rather of nationalization, is a stable project. He argues that delayed nationalization, which is this need to integrate immigrant populations into the national community, is always an endless task, that this is something that has to be done constantly, which would mean that the project of nationalization is very fragile or has to be perpetuated. Similarly, he says that the stability of a nation form is perpetuated only by state intervention in, one, the reproduction of the economy, and two, in the formation of the individual, family structure, and private life. These ideas will come up in the later sections.